Greetings, fellow investors. I'm Matthew Cochran, a lead advisor at Seven Investing, where it is our mission to empower you to invest in your future. We do that by providing monthly stock recommendations to our premium members and educational content that is freely available to everyone. Listeners, today I am very excited to introduce Daniel Joshua Rubin, the author of the newly published book, 27 Essential Principles of Story. He is an experienced writer who has written for mediums such as TV, theater. He has written online articles, and he's taught writing courses at many universities, which begs the question, what is he doing on an investment podcast? Well, as it so happens, I have talked with Daniel, first on investment discussion boards and now on Twitter, mostly through DMs, for years. And what he manages to keep secret from many people is how savvy of an investor he is. And today you are in store for a special treat. We're going to discuss how Daniel applies the principles of narrative, of story, to his investment process. And I think it's going to be a little bit of a different show. I think it's going to be fun. So let's get started. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hey, Matt, thanks a lot for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, I'm going to ask our listeners to indulge us for just a couple of minutes. And I promise listeners, we're going to keep this part quick. But before we get to investing, let's quickly discuss your book, 27 Essential Principles of Story. I have read it cover to cover. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Why don't you give us a quick summary of the book and why you thought it was necessary to write it?
Sure. It's funny from an investing standpoint. I'm a very big Charlie Munger fan. I love his plain spoken principles, his mental models, and I realized I had a kind of confluence of events where I was working in agricultural risk management for a little bit. And I was a big fan of UFC. And I have a lot of friends who are musicians. And all these things kind of came together where I realized that the best people in anything, in whatever they do, whether it's martial arts or writing or investing or building chairs or being a carpenter, they have fundamental principles that they stick to. And Charlie Munger has talked a lot about how when you are just not stupid, that's better than being brilliant. When you get all the fundamentals right, he talks about how in an investment, you get what he calls a Lollapalooza effect, where the sum, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I had taken a break from writing and I had a regular 9-to-5 job. And I started getting the passion to write again. So I kept a notebook of principles, just the most fundamental basic principles. And I was raised in New York and I lived in LA, but now I'm a humble Midwesterner. And I really do think there's a lot of truth to the idea that Midwestern people are very plain spoken, have a lot of humility, they're not ostentatious. And I wanted to strip all the jargon out of the language of teaching story. There's a lot of terms that they use in storytelling, like crisis and climax and inciting incident. And these terms that don't necessarily articulate what the thing is. So I built this notebook of simple, plain English principles. And it was just for me to help my writing. But as I started developing it, I started thinking, this is pretty good. Like this would be a good foundation for a school. And I thought I'd self-publish maybe a little book to go with I have a writing studio in Evanston because I'd rather teach it my way than be part of a big university. And I think I could do it a lot cheaper. So anyway, but sure enough, because I had no intentions of being a big shot with this, I happened to call an agent who's a big agent who represented a friend of mine who wrote a great book called The Personal MBA. And sure enough, she loved the book and signed me right away and then sold the book. And I know had I desperately wanted to sell the book, I never would have sold the book. But somehow, I don't know how the universe works that way. But anyway, so I just wanted to make it as simple as possible and get back to the basics that Aristotle was talking about 2,500 years ago: plot, character, theme, dialogue, setting. And that's what I did. And
well, you did a great job. I've read lots of books about writing because I want to be a clear, effective writer. And they're usually good, but most of them, they're very dry. But this wasn't at all. Because you included examples, like you drew from movies and classic books to comic books to rap songs, and it just really enlivened the book. How did you come up with all the examples in the book, and maybe like give us an example of one of your favorites?
Sure. Oh my God, I'm not joking around. The book took really about 4 years. And one of my problems in my career was that I wanted to do too many different things. And one of the things we're going to talk about a lot today is the power of focus. But I, God, my brain just shot. Can you ask me that question again? Sorry, I'm going to.
No, just like maybe like one of your favorite examples of
Oh, sure.
like the stories you included in your chapters, because every single chapter, I mean, you had 27 principles, and I think there's 27 chapters, and every single chapter had a different example of a story. Like, and it was like from Shakespeare to South Park to Eminem, to Netflix shows.
Yeah.
What was maybe like your favorite example of a story you included?
It's funny, man. That's like asking me which kid I love the best. But in a lot of ways, I think that my favorite one is probably a principle called write characters to the top of their intelligence. And again, what I want to do is kind of get to, like, Elon Musk talks a lot about first principles, like the most very basic foundational things you need. Like if you're building a car, you don't necessarily have to have a steering wheel. You have to have a mechanism to steer the car. So the first principle is you need steering. So like one of my favorite first principles of writing is you absolutely have to write characters to the top of their intelligence. So I broke down the song Stan, like Eminem's song Stan. It's an iconic song. A Stan is an archetype of the obsessed fan. And when you break that song down line by line, you see that every single thing Stan does is not only intelligent, it's kind of brilliant. And he really attacks the mind of Eminem through the song. So I think that when you're telling a story, if every single character is at the top of their game, you're objectively, factually going to have a much better story. Except the thing is, it forces you to be a much better writer. You got to dig deep to make sure everyone's at the top of their game. So I'd say that was a really good one.
That a couple of things there, but like one of the things, like I've always I enjoy writing,
Yeah.
and obviously, and like one of the things I've always like thought in the back of my head is like one day I'm gonna write, maybe I'll try to write a novel or something like that. Like years in the future, I'll just try it. And like reading your book, I'm like, this is a lot harder than I was kind of giving it credit for. Like coming up with a story, and it made me appreciate more the process that goes into writing a great story. Um, you know, Daniel, why is the concept of story so important to us as humans, as people? Like, why is narrative so essential to the human experience?
Sure. There's two things had a huge impact on me about this as I was developing the book. Like I knew story was critically important, but to be honest, through the course of writing a book, it went exponentially higher than I ever thought. So E.O. Wilson, a famous biologist, has an essay called The Power of Story. And what he talks about is, as a human being, as you move through the world, you're processing so many sights and sounds and images and feelings and things that if you couldn't form narratives, you couldn't make sense of what's going on. And then the book Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Harari, that just blew me away, because what he talks about is, if you look at companies, nations, marriages, religions, the stories that we tell are not necessarily provable objective facts. They're kind of things we agree to, in a sense that, like, my wife and I are married. We have a certificate, it says we're married, but it's not necessarily an objective fact. Like if tomorrow she wakes up and goes, we're actually not married, then we're not married anymore. Or if tomorrow they change the borders between Canada and America, well, then then the nation changes. If they put a different flag and name it something different, then it's a different thing. If you look at religion, look at Christianity. The story of Jesus is so fantastically well told. It has a powerful main character. He has a clear narrative. His death is unbelievably compelling, and it's filled with meaning. And it's not an accident that that's the biggest religion in the world. So, or if you look at politics now, like I thought in the first election, and again, I'm not going to drag us into politics, I promise.
Be careful. Be careful.
I will, I promise. But I really think this feels kind of objective to me, and I'm not making any value judgments. I just think Trump's story in 2016 was much sharper than it was in 2020, meaning he said, I alone can fix it and build the wall and make America great again. And it had a certain consistency, whereas keep America great again in the middle of a pandemic was a problematic message. Not that he didn't get 70 million votes, but anyway, so this narrative shapes, our lives, our religions, our marriages, our nations, our corporations, and it's just essential to being a human being.
Sure. All right. And now, listeners, I promise the rest of the show is going to be about investing. But thanks for indulging us there, because that sets the stage for everything else. Daniel, but let's move on to your experience as an investor. How did you first come to be interested in investing? And just tell us like your journey or evolution, if you will, as an investor.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you said what you just said about this is going to be very, very relevant. And frankly speaking, and I hope this isn't obnoxious, but getting clear on how narrative works in investing has made me a lot of freaking money. And it just has. And I really think that it's very worth paying attention to what we're going to talk about. So for me, I was a member of the Motley Fool community I've been in that community for like 20 years. And I noticed that I seem to have like my own personal, I can't do math. I don't even know what long division is. I'm the mathematically challenged beyond comprehension. So I always figured I must not be good at investing because I don't know math. But I often seem to, and I also am not a tech expert. So I don't even know how like the internet works or how my phone rings or any of that stuff. But I noticed that I seem to always gravitate toward winning stocks. And I, at one point had, this was like 10, 15 years ago, I had like 40% of our portfolio in Amazon and Netflix, because I thought Bezos and Hastings, I thought these were great companies and I couldn't imagine how they would lose. So long story short, a financial planner talked me out of doing my own investments. He said I couldn't possibly understand this stuff. I actually had a conversation with a noted podcaster in finance, and I was pitching him an idea to develop his book. And he told me, you'll never be a good investor. I have all the brilliant analysis and I have teams of guys analyzing stuff. So these two guys convinced me that I couldn't possibly be good at this. And I sold all my stuff and I hired a planner and I paid him all kinds of money. And then about maybe 7 years later, I looked at what my portfolio was without him and I compared it to what I had with him. And I'm paying this guy tens of thousands of dollars, if not more. And I annihilated him if I had kept my portfolio. I mean, I'm talking about like over $1 million, which for me is no joke. I mean, I'm half a starving artist.
Right.
I was furious. But nobody had bad intentions. No, they really believed what they were saying. And I really don't think it was an evil thing. So I fired them. And then I took over my own portfolio. And in the last 3 years, where I got really dedicated to developing my method of what I call narrative investing, which I mix with a lot of other brilliant investors like yourself, where I get my picks, and my results have been like unbelievable. Like I'm up over, I think I've like tripled our portfolio in the last 3 years, and it's a huge deal. And I've done it by sticking to strict principles of what I'm calling, what we're going to talk about, of narrative investing.
So let's talk about narrative investing. We've talked before, and you say there are 3 legs to the investment thesis stool.
Right.
What are they, and how does narrative investing fit into that?
Sure. So obviously you have financial analysis. You have all the metrics, profit margins, accelerating growth rates, all those things that are absolutely essential. And then obviously you have the business and the tech analysis. Those are two critical legs of the stool. But then there's the intangibles: leadership, branding, cool factor, how inspiring the product is, logos, colors, all culture, analyzing the leaders. And that stuff is very hard to quantify. And I think what I am frustrated with as an investor, have been, is and what I would consider the arrogance of value investors. But I do think this is changing now. And so I've known a lot of value investors, and you still see them all the time on Seeking Alpha and all these sites, where they think they can come up with a definitive number that values a stock, which is ridiculous. It's a dynamic thing. It's always changing, and it's based on human emotions. But now you really do see that changing. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Aswath Damodaran, who's a famous value investor at NYU, and he, to his great credit, I think he's a brilliant guy, and he works his tail off to come up with his valuations, but he's often been wrong. And he wrote a book called Narrative and Numbers, where he said, I can make these numbers say anything I want based on the stories I'm telling myself. And Robert Shiller, who's the Yale economist who coined the phrase irrational exuberance, he wrote a book called, I think, Narrative Economics, saying we have to understand the narratives taking place in society, in industries and companies with people. There's a national mood. Obviously things were very different in the Roaring '20s versus maybe post-war, post-World War II. And all these stories greatly affect the price of things. So I feel like a guy like me is very in tune with all this stuff. And that so for me, the financial analysis and the tech analysis fit in kind of a wrapper, which is the narrative. And I look at the narrative as the third leg of the stool that wraps up the whole thing and helps put it into context and make sense of it.
Sure. Absolutely. I feel like we could just talk about that for the rest of the hour.
Yes.
Okay. We're talking a lot about stories and stocks, and we hear the term story stock all the time.
Right.
Is that what you're getting at? Do you invest in quote unquote story stocks? Is there a difference in investing in stocks with great stories and story stocks?
This is a great question. It gets right to the heart of what we're doing. A lot of people get almost angry at the idea of a story stock. And that's one of my main missions as an investor, is to create a new definition of what a great story stock really is. So the negative perception of a story stock implies that people are thinking emotionally, that they're not really studying the business, that maybe they're inspired by the mission or the charisma of the leader. So I wrote a long post not long ago about a company called Solazyme. And Solazyme, 6 years ago, they had biofuel. They were gonna suck fuel out of algae, and they were gonna make cosmetics and fuel and food additives. And the TAM was going to be trillions of dollars. Everyone was going to get filthy rich, and the thing went kablooey and went nowhere. And obviously, people were telling a false story based on dreams and drama and emotion. What I'm saying is a great stock story is really about that you believe it's very simple for the company to do what they say they're going to do. So if I could, I want to just talk about really quick the difference between a great story, like a work of fiction, and a great stock story.
Yeah, take the floor, man.
Thank you. So in a great story, I'll just use Rocky or The Godfather as an example, because everybody knows these. We want to see the hero suffer. We want to see everything. So here's a key point. In any story, in the classic sense, you have a hero and you have an object of desire. Rocky wants to win the heavyweight title. And when he realizes he can't win, he just wants to go the distance, because then if he goes the distance, he'll know he's not just another bum from the neighborhood. So a great story has a clear objective, but in a work of fiction, we want to torture the main character. Frodo Baggins in Lord of the Rings, that poor guy gets He gets stabbed by like a giant stone golem. He gets bit by a spider. He gets his finger bit off. He's burnt. I mean, the guy gets tortured, and we love that. As investors, we don't want that. We just want to, basically, the greatest stock story would be a guy who says, I have this huge machine. It gobbles up tons of money, and all I got to do is grab the money. And we go, boy, that, and I have no competition, and it's really easy for me to defend those profits. So that's a huge thing about the difference between a classic story and a great stock story. And we want logic and cause and effect, and we want it to be defensible. A great story has a mathematical quality. We believe that this guy doing this thing can achieve this great objective. And that's what we want from our investments. We want to believe that whoever the CEO is or the leadership team, that they can do what they say they're going to do. So that's a big important point about stories, great stock stories, and properly defining what a great stock story is.
So do you think you can use a company's narrative to see how it's going to fare into the future?
Absolutely. And again, I am not an arrogant jerk, but I've had a great run in the last, I think, 18 months, by far the best in my career, since I started believing in this, in the ability to predict the future based on narratives. So in real life, you'll see this all the time. And the reason I'm so passionate about story is it goes so far beyond, well, we talked about this already, but it really comes up in your regular life. Like, I once had a friend who was a 40-something guy who decided that he was going to write young adult fiction for girls. And I was like, that's never going to work. We know that. You're not a young girl. You don't know that. You don't love that. And it went nowhere. So anyway, that's a simple example. But let me give you 3 quick stories really fast. Here's a company I'm going to tell you about that was a terrible story. And I looked at the story, and in about, I don't know, 15 to 30 minutes, I was like, this is garbage. Anyone can see this is going nowhere. So the company was called Helios and Matheson. Helios and Matheson had an app that tracked crime in neighborhoods. And somehow, I don't even know how, I might be missing something, but somehow they got a hold of MoviePass.
Right.
And then they decided they were a company that sells subscriptions to go to the movies, and you get unlimited amounts of movie going for a ridiculous price. And the more they sold, the more they lost, and they kept selling millions and millions of subscriptions. And somehow they were going to scale the business, reduce the offer, make it profitable, and make a ton of money. But what really triggered me is I looked at the CEO at the time, and he had come from an industry of nutraceuticals and multi-level marketing, and he had like an energy drink. Everything about that story was absolute garbage. So I was telling anyone who would listen to me, because that stock ran up. I think it ran up to like $10 a share and a really high valuation.
Yeah, it had its moment in the sun. Yeah.
It was unbelievable. And I'm like, this is nothing. This is garbage. And now it's it's worth literally, I think, like 1/1000th of a penny a share.
Yeah, I think did it officially go bankrupt, or is it still?
I looked it up right before I came on, and I'm not joking around. I really think the share price is like 0.0001, which again, I'm mathematically challenged. I don't even know what that is, but it's not good.
There was a story of like I think somebody shared this on Twitter, but like he was a city banker and he bought a movie pass so that after work, if he didn't want to go out of the city to his home and then come back for like his nightlife, for go to clubs or whatever, like he bought a movie pass and he would just pick a movie that had been out a while and wouldn't have a big audience, and he would just go there to take naps. And like when people are like subscribed, and he did that every day after work. And I'm like, that's like when people are subscribing to your movie subscription to go take a naps like every single day, like that's probably a bad business model.
It was terrible. So another one that's really interesting to me, around in June, I got an email from a friend of mine who's a great investor. And he said, hey, Rubin, he said, there's two companies I'm looking at. One was Fastly and one was Slack. But he was more interested in Slack at the time. And he said, what do you think of these? So I looked at Slack. And if you look at the framework of the company, Stuart Butterfield, the CEO, is indisputably a brilliant guy. He's a philosophy major from Cambridge. He built this apparently incredible product. My wife uses it. My wife's in high-tech sales. She loves it. But when I don't use it and I didn't know it, when I looked on the website, I was like, I don't even get what this really is. It's got like channels and they talk about is a replacement for email. And what the website says is that if you buy the product, you'll see a higher return on communication. And I thought, I don't really know what this is. And I don't really know what it does. But obviously the product is loved. The CEO is a great guy. And look, it's very important that people realize when we're trying to get great investments, we are talking about the best of the best of the best. Compared to the average schnook, all these companies are amazing. I mean, Slack is a multi-billion-dollar company, and I have nothing but mad respect. But as an investor, I was like, this doesn't feel to me like best of the best of the best, but it feels really good. And I predicted to my friend in the email, I said, what I think is going to happen with this is they're going to get bought by Microsoft or Salesforce. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And again, like my friend who was writing young adult fiction, I do think if you take out all the emotion and drama of life and just look at the most basic things, life is often the most expected thing is what happens. So those two companies, maybe they're kind of extreme examples, but it seemed utterly guessable to me that Helios and Matheson would go kablooey, that Slack would do good but not great. And I consider getting acquired good, not great. It's great. I mean, it's good that it happened.
Sure.
But we don't want a 50% gain. We want, our companies to 10, 20, 100x over time.
Sure.
So anyway, that was a good example and a bad example and a mediocre example. Now, I'll talk about some super winners. You'll have to shut me up because I have a couple of them that I'm like so passionate about.
All right.
Did you want to ask me anything there, or should I?
No. Let's hear it.
Now you're feeling what my wife often feels, which is just the runaway train is just it's barreling down the tracks.
No, we're on the track. So let's.
So one of the things I'm absolutely a fanatic about in story is simplicity. And this is just a critical point that a great story is simple. So if you look at Hamlet, and I promise I'm going to get back to investing, Hamlet, The Godfather, Rocky, Jaws, these are incredibly simple packages or frameworks of the narrative. Hamlet, really all that happens in Hamlet, which is arguably the most psychologically sophisticated, brilliant story ever told. But really all that happens is a ghost shows up, he tells a prince, you got to kill the king, and the prince kills the king. I mean, there's a long journey of him thinking about what he's going to do and what's the implications are of it. But really, that's the framework. In Godfather, they basically spend 25 minutes in the beginning of the film telling you, this guy's a great guy. He's powerful. He controls congressmen. He's got tons of money. He's just an amazingly powerful, he's the most powerful criminal in the world. And then his power is challenged when Sollozzo offers him a drug deal. And then he basically gets shot and his son has to take over. But again, simple stories. And in that simplicity, you can move the whole world. So now one more quick point about why simplicity has value to us as investors and as entrepreneurs and business people. It's just common sense that if you can articulate the mission clearly, you're going to inspire your workers, your partners, your prospects, your investors, and because everyone knows what you're doing. I mean, if you're, I was talking about Jocko Willink before, drinking his energy drink here, fired me up, and he's a Navy SEAL commander, and one of the things he'll talk about is you have to make the mission clear to the soldiers. You have to say, take that hill, kill that terrorist, and get back here. You can't, if you say to them, take that hill, then go and do this other thing, and then do this other thing, and and go pick up these other guys. You're adding so much complexity in the system. And the main point I really wanted to make about this is when I've been reading scripts by younger writers and new writers, which I do a tremendous amount of the time, I've been amazed by how much a story is damaged by adding in a character you don't really need, or adding in a mission or a storyline you don't really need. So a famous story is that when Steven Spielberg was adapting Jaws, in the book Jaws, Hooper, Richard Dreyfuss, has an affair with Chief Brody's wife. And Spielberg was like, who needs that? This is a movie about guys chasing a shark, and that's plenty. So by staying focused, he made one of the great movies of all time. And it has all kinds of interesting implications that are still true today, especially in the age of COVID, where people don't want to shut the beaches because they don't want to hurt business.
Yeah, so let me ask you about that, because I think this is actually like the most and you gave me lots of notes, and we've talked about investing for a long time, but I think this is the most important point you have.
Okay.
Like when you look at Amazon and Jeff Bezos, for instance,
Yeah.
like from the very beginning, it's day one has been his message. It's day one. We're not worried about profits next quarter. We're not worried about profits next year. We're going to reinvest. We're going to reinvest. We're going to reinvest
Right.
and grow and grow and grow. And because he did that from the very beginning, I feel like he attracted the absolute right shareholder base from the beginning. Like, imagine if like in 2001, after the tech bubble, Carl Icahn had come in and been an activist investor, said, the most profitable thing we have is like books and DVDs, and that's what we're going to stick to. We're not going to grow because we can be profitable like this. Or, I always think like, but that never had a chance of happening because Jeff Bezos was so good at communicating the company's mission, or the company's like ethos, if you will. Like it's day one from the beginning that he had the right shareholder base.
Absolutely. And again, I think such an important point is he realized, start with one thing, get people buying books online. Everybody loves books. It's a passionate subject. And he got that rock solid before he moved on. And that does bring me to a really important point. My style of investing, again, what I'm calling narrative investing, I'm never saying that other people are wrong. Like I used to do that when I was a younger, dumber guy, but now that I'm in my 50s, it's actually a super cool thing that you don't have to be so extreme in all your thoughts. This is my style. I like, there are companies that have more complicated products and messages and complex financial services. And I'm not saying that those will definitely fail. I'm only saying that for me, the simpler ones are easier to follow. They're more enjoyable for me to follow. And they're within my, the Buffett circle of competence. But yeah, there's no doubt, but because Bezos took that thing, oh my God, where, to
Right.
like layers of complexity.
Right. And then, you just think like too, like, Blockbuster at a certain point was close to taking out Netflix, and they were right there on the cusp. And the thing that killed them was Carl Icahn came in and said, no, we need to do this. We need to worry about profits right now. And they weren't selling the big term vision of like what they could do. Like he was worried about profits the next couple quarters. Right. And like, I just wonder, like, if Blockbuster had been able to tell a better story, like, could have that just like stopped that whole thing from happening, but like that story never got told at Blockbuster, whereas it did get told at Netflix. And that was like almost the entire difference right there.
Absolutely. And without a doubt, there's no doubt in my mind. And Reed Hastings, I'm glad we're talking about him because he's to me, he's the patron saint of narrative investing. I mean, he's the greatest. He knew from day one he was going to sell flicks on the internet, Netflix, rock solid. He had to start with DVDs by mail, and then he got rid of those. And he realized all I have to do is create an app, put it on every device, get people to sign up, and I can get hundreds of millions of subscribers and generate billions in revenue. People were telling him that he should do licensing, merchandising, that he should have porn, video games. I mean, it was like there were so many ways for him to mess up that story. but he kept it as simple as it could possibly be kept. And look what he built. Whereas Blockbuster they had the exact same product for a while. They tried to copy it, but they had all those retail stores that they were stuck with. So doing retail and doing apps by internet is a completely different thing. And what's so important about this and to investors is because Reed Hastings was so relentlessly focused on hiring the best developers, on making sure the apps always work on I have Apple TV. Every time I'm on another app, they ask me to log in. I got to go find my password. I got to find some code to activate it. I've been with Netflix like 20 years. I've never, ever had a single problem. So that being an expert in that core competence is a competitive advantage. And that I think is just incredibly important.
Sure. Why don't I think tell your Shark Tank story.
Oh, sure.
That I think applies to this.
Okay, absolutely. So this is great. I love Shark Tank. I watch it with my daughter all the time. I just think it's an incredibly valuable show for watching narrative investing in action. So there were these two guys who came on to talk about their business having a party boat. And they were silly guys. They had like Navy costumes, and they were real clowns, but they were very likable guys. And they came on and they said that they have these party boats. And the party boats go out, they serve really great food, they serve champagne, people go out for a couple hours, get drunk, come home, and that's it. And you could see the 5 investors were just laughing at them. And then Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, says, well, how much money do you make on a party boat each year? And they said 130 grand. And you saw all the investors like, whoa, this is a legit business. So you have one boat. If you come to us for the money, you'll get 500 boats and you're making real money. And they said, and so it was done. Like, story is perfect, clean, simple, clear. You guys have the investment. But then they said, wait, you're missing the best part of it. And they were like, what's the best part of it? And they said, our food is so good. We're going to serve the food in supermarkets. And you could see the guys like almost laughing. And they're like, so wait, you're party boats and you're a retail product. And they didn't even understand anything about like shelf space and how it works to get those premium shelf spaces and advertising and blah, blah, blah. So then they said, but there's one more thing, the piece de resistance of this thing. We're going to end with a ride in Las Vegas. And you just saw the Shark Tank guys cracking up about like the party boat ride. They're like, where else to party than Vegas?
Right.
Anyway, they utterly destroyed a great story. And this happens all the time, I think, in businesses. And, I think this is the ballpark of diversification, the Peter Lynch word.
It definitely, it reminded me of that too, just as you're talking. But okay, so Daniel, how do you tell the difference between like diversification like that or Amazon when they're going from books to selling DVDs to selling everything on the internet and then going into the cloud and everything else? Like, when is it like great optionality and when is it diversification?
Right. It's funny that I think I'll talk about the stock that drives everyone crazy, good and bad. But I think that Elon Musk's, the first story that he laid out for Tesla was one. I'm sorry, I'm looking for it right now. I think was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. In as far as it's honestly, I think it should be studied in business schools. His first blog post about Tesla, which is where I learned about it, and I promise this will answer the question of diversification.
No problem.
Now, Elon Musk is such a brilliant, incredible human being that it's hard to really use him for anything. But this guy's built a $500 billion company. And so much of it is fueled by, there's an investor who goes by the name the stock novice, and he calls it the narrative premium. And this is the greatest example in business history that I know of narrative premium. So what he said is, we're going to build a sports car. He said, we're going to use that money to build a more affordable more affordable car. He said, then we're going to use that money to build an even more affordable car. And while we're doing that, he said, we're going to provide zero emission electric power options. And he did every single one of those things. He did the Roadster, he did the Model S, Then he's doing the Model Y, and he's putting up those power stations everywhere. Now, it's funny because what tripped me up was that was his story, and I thought it was flawless. And I could live with him building rocket ships on the
Right.
side, even though it's
Sure.
not my favorite thing to see a guy with two passions. But
Right.
when I got out of Tesla was he started digging tunnels. He started making flamethrowers. He started dating, like famous electronic dance, that woman Grimes. He was fighting with rappers.
He made solar roofs.
Solar roofs. He called that guy in Thailand a pedo guy.
Right. Right.
And that's where I went, I'm out. I don't know what to make of this. So for me, he got off the story. So I look at the story as like a narrative track. And if things would fit on that track where you're trying to, revolutionize travel, I can live with a Cybertruck. I can live with a plane, maybe, but I've heard Buffett talk about this, that Amazon, I don't even know what to say about that, because to be honest, I never thought that was possible. I didn't think you could do all those things. So, but for me, it's if your mission is clear and each thing fits in accordance with, I mean, think about like Rocky. If you think about the movie Rocky, he drinks raw eggs. He goes jogging at 4 a.m. Those are on the story. If he decided he wanted to open like a business with his grandpa, that'd be off the story. So I hope that kind of answered your question. That
Sure.
way,
Sure.
thing is either on track or not and related to the mission.
Sure. Well, we did not say we were going to talk about this, but let's talk about this. Okay. We disagree on the company Square.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll say I see Square and I see the story as we're going to help small businesses fight against the big box retailers. We're going to give them the same bells and whistles that, the big chains have. And we're fighting for the little guy, but which is fine, but you don't see that. So where do you, I guess, give me your side of it.
Sure. This is a great and really important question. And I want to give a shout out to all my friends who are over 50 now, because I really do feel that I really like Jack Dorsey a lot. I mean, how could you not respect all that this guy has achieved and what he's able to do? And one of the big realizations I've made as an investor is that, and I promise I'm going to get to that.
Yeah.
But my big realization is that as an investor, you have to have your core criteria. And I really believe it is better to let a great company make a lot of money and not invest in it, even if you kind of believe in it, because it doesn't fit your core criteria. And when you get away from your discipline, that's when, at least in my life, everything has gone kablooey. So for me, in the back of my mind, to be honest, and maybe I'm being fake because Square has done really well, but I can't have a CEO who's not 100% committed to my mission. Again, Chief Brody killed a shark. That's what I'm paying you to do. I'm not paying you to go messing around. I don't want to watch the movie with an affair in it. And I just cannot get my head around how this guy works on Twitter in the morning and Square at night. And no, I want you working 24/7 for my money. But he's clearly able to do that with a great team. And so that was a big thing for me. But I do feel, without a doubt in my mind, I know they've tried to sell Twitter, that Square is his deeper passion. I know, like when Dorsey talks about living in Africa, I really believe he wants to help small business people have a version of the American dream. I think that's where his passion is. And I know he tried to sell Twitter to Disney. Iger talked about it in his book. So the story of Square, I like 1,000,000 times better than Twitter for me. But
yeah, I agree with you there. Yes. And that's where his, if you look at his ownership and his financial incentives, it lies with Square much more than Twitter too.
Yeah, it feels, and the story is so perfect. And to be honest, every time I go to a small business and they have the Square payment system, I will ask about them just because it's fun to talk about. And
so do I. It drives my wife crazy. It
Yeah,
drives my wife crazy. I'll be like, oh, how long have you had Square? And, how do you like this?
yeah,
Or
yeah. And they, I mean, I have seen universal raves, and the things are really nice looking. I mean, they look great. And to be honest, if he ever sells Twitter, I would be interested in revisiting that. I mean, you've taught me one of my favorite things about you as an investor, if I may quickly
yeah,
divulge.
if you're gonna compliment me, we can take it all the time you want.
You really have an expertise and a comfort with bigger stocks. My pea brain gets tripped up by just size, and I think I've underestimated like that Apple and Amazon are like flirting with the trillions. It's just hard for me to get my head around that. Whereas I like a nice 5 billion where I go, okay, I get it. Netflix is whatever. When it was like 10 billion, I was like, okay, well, you had 100 million subscribers. But anyway, sorry. So I got us off track there for a second.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Well, and sometimes I see those big companies like Microsoft, for example, or something like that, like where you talked about like the perfect investment story is this machine that just picks up money. And when I see like Microsoft or like other big tech companies, I'm like, it's almost like that's what they are. They're just this big machine that keeps picking up money. And now granted, I think you limit your upside there, but I also think you limit your downside there too.
Absolutely. And I'm a fanatic. For me, what really got me in big in the last 18 months is, for me, these software companies they're just the best stories I've seen, where you have giant margins. You have, once people start using, like I use Microsoft Word, I'm never not using Microsoft Word. That's never going to happen. I will pay the $100 for the rest of my life. I'm not going to learn. You know how great a product would have to be to make me learn all those codes and things that it's
Yeah.
never ever happening in a billion years.
Right. Right.
That's how I feel about all these cloud SaaS stocks. That once you've installed, you know, Salesforce or CrowdStrike or Coupa or whatever it is, good luck being the other guy coming in and saying, hey guys, I need you to do something for me. Strip all that out, retrain everybody, because my thing is so much better. It's just never going to happen,
Right.
especially when these companies are watching everything you do and saying, oh God, they don't like these features, they like these, and improving the product. So that's why for me, the narrative of these cloud SaaS stocks is so powerful, and the ability to defend the moat is so massive that I really just went all in on those and super concentrated right now.
Sure. Well, it's been a great period for those stocks. Daniel, let's one more question. And again, something we didn't discuss, but like we've talked many times online. And I know you're a father. And this is something I've asked a lot of my guests. Like, how did you impart your passion or any investing wisdom on to your children?
It's funny. I believe, like, and this is obviously a huge subject right now, but media literacy. I always, I have one daughter, and they say the good Lord never gives you more than you can handle, and got me right by us not having any more. But I I always sit with her and try to. We watch commercials, or we'll hear somebody talk, and I'll say, what I will say to her, what story is being told here? What is that person trying to do to you? And so that's the biggest thing for me. I always try to get her to think, who's talking, what's like, hero and object of desire is just everywhere. It's in business. It happens with her friends sometimes. So for me, that's the big thing. Just always looking at what story is playing out, who wants what, why, and who's trying to oppose them.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for sharing. Let's wrap up our conversation there. Daniel Joshua Rubin, the author of 27 Essential Principles of Story. I've read it. I love it. Uh, Daniel, where can people find you if they're interested in following you?
I'm on Twitter my handle is at Dan Joshua Rubin. I have a website called Story 27, which I'm aggressively developing right now. And I have a little school, if you happen to be in the Chicago area, where when this COVID ends, which we all can't wait for, is I'll be teaching classes and hopefully developing some online programs. And I consult on scripts when people have like you were saying, when that moment comes, like I know you were talking about, everyone I meet has a novel or a screenplay, and I think of it as like a bullet in a cowboy's gut. Like until you deal with that bullet, and so I love working with writers on helping them get their story told.
Well, that's excellent. And we'll link your site in the our accompanying piece on our website where we post this podcast. Daniel Joshua Rubin, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on today and discussing investing with us. Again, I'm Matthew Cochran, lead advisor with 7 Investing, and we're here to empower you to invest in your future. Have a great day, everyone.